Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our weekly Zoom call. We do this Zoom webinar actually every week, and we always have Mondays set aside for our opportunity calls for brand new people that want to learn about For Life and transfer factor and this incredible opportunity that we have. And then Wednesdays, we always have our training. Monday and Wednesday is in Portuguese first, and then in English. We just finished our Portuguese Zoom webinar with Dr. Paula Brock. We talked about transfer factor science. It was an amazing call. And this call, by the way, with Dr. Vollmer and with Dr. Paula Brock will be uploaded in my portal on my website. If you just go to, and Claudia will put this in the chat, www.davedaughtry.com. Just go to the education library and you can go in there and you'll be able to download this recording for today. So let's get started. You know, today's a special day. It's always fun when we have special guests on here. Those of you that don't know me, my name is Dave Daughtrey. I'm a Platinum International Diamond with For Life Research. I have been an associate, a distributor for For Life since 1998. And I fell in love with transfer factor after about less than 30 days of using the product. I fell in love with it because of what it did for me as far as my health goes. I was struggling with a serious health challenge. And after I learned about the product, and keep in mind, this was 1998. There was no Google, no YouTube. So I had to basically ask for information on facts. And I received papers and facts and read. And the more I read, the more curious I became. The more curious I became, the more I learned. And the process was incredible. I learned a lot about transfer factor, and I'm very grateful for all of the doctors and scientists I've met over the years, from Dr. Calvin McCausland, Dr. Rob Robertson, Dr. Dwayne Townsend, and now Dr. David Vollmer. So we're very blessed to have Dr. Vollmer with us today. I always enjoy listening to the scientists and to the doctors because we learn a lot, and knowledge creates confidence. Confidence should create action, and it's that action that creates results. But it begins with knowledge. So I just want to ask everybody that's listening in today, take this information. As you hear it, we're going to take some questions from everybody as well. But remember that knowledge is really good. Knowledge is power. But at the same time, how we share that knowledge with people is so important. And one thing I like about Dr. Vollmer, Dr. McCausland, pretty much all the doctors I've worked with over the years, is that they understand the KISS method. KISS, you know, we all know what KISS is, right? It stands for keep it simple and stupid, all right? And I kind of like that method because it's helped me throughout the years. So as we get this information and we learn from Dr. Vollmer, take it, process it, and share it with people. And that's really what's important here, is to share this information. Right now, we're all going through a crisis around the world with this pandemic that's going on. We're all, you know, cocooning in our homes. We can't go anywhere, social distancing. And so this is a great opportunity for us all to take the time and to learn, but share, you know, get on, invite people. Even right now, we're just starting this call. We'll be going on here for about an hour. Invite people. Let's get this up to over 100 people on this call today. We had 160 on the Portuguese call. All right, this is English, you guys. So let's get people on here. So let's get started. Now, I apologize, my halo's hitting me in my glasses, so you might see a little shine in my glasses here. So, but let's get started. We've got a special guest, Dr. David Vollmer, who's with us today. And Dr. Vollmer, he is the Chief Scientific Officer for For Life Research. He's been with For Life now. How many years, Dr. Vollmer, have you been with For Life?
It's been over 7 now.
Over 7 years. And I know that you're a specialist with quality control. You've actually, you hold patents, as I understand, patents that have to do with, is it processing as far as cancer and inflammation?
Yeah, so that was in my previous life. So I spent a lot of years in the pharmaceutical industry, looking at drugs that dealt with cancer, inflammation. So I have a number of publications as well as patents around that work. And then about 7 years ago, came to For Life in a completely different setting, looking at supplements, and we've actually published quite a bit here at 4Life, and have a few patents as well with the work that we're doing at 4Life.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand, 4Life, we're not a drug company, but we adhere to those same standards, pharmaceutical standards, in the method to where we manufacture and process our product, correct?
Yeah, that absolutely right. In fact, that's one of the things that I think really that I love about 4Life. It's what brought me to 4Life was working in the quality control lab. Coming from pharmaceuticals, that was my expertise, was product development as well as quality control. And so when I got to 4Life, one of the questions that I asked is, how this is how I would like to run this. I'd like to run our lab, our quality system, like the pharmaceuticals do, which follow what we call GMPs, or good manufacturing practices. And the good manufacturing practices in the pharmaceutical industry are quite rigid compared to those in the supplement industry. And so in a lot of ways, we're going above and beyond what others do in the industry. I think it's something that kind of sets us apart, how we do all of our quality systems at 4Life compared to other folks within our industry. But it's a really important part of the products that we develop, because if you don't have good quality ingredients that go into good quality products, then you're really not going to be able to sustain yourself as a reputable company for a long time. Certainly not over 2 decades.
What that does for us as well, it gives us we're out in the field sharing this information with people. It gives us tremendous confidence. Over the years, when I've talked to the doctors and I attend the various seminars that you have at conventions and so forth, the workshops, I always leave with a great confidence and pride in what we have and what we're sharing with people. So even though I may not always understand what the doctors are saying, it really gives me that assurity and that confidence and pride. So when I go out and share this with people, I can really hold my head high. And we're grateful for that too. So thank you, Dr. Vollmer. So let's go and get started with some of the questions we have here. And those of you that have questions that are listening, please try to use the Q&A section on this call, because if it's in the chat, it gets buried. And sometimes it's hard to go back and look at all of the comments and so forth in the chat. So just use the Q&A section, please, and we'll do our best to get to all the questions. We may miss a few. Please understand that sometimes we just can't answer every one, but we will have this webinar uploaded to my website, davedaughtry.com, later this evening. So you can all download it and watch it anytime you'd like, as well as other videos and training we'll be having. So let's go ahead and get started. I've been around the health and wellness industry for a long time. And for me, the journey began in 1991. I actually was diagnosed with a condition called Crohn's disease. And at that time, not many people talked about it. Now you hear about it on commercials and everything, but it affected me tremendously. And that led me to start doing some research because, I wanted to empower myself. Knowledge is power. And I wanted to learn. So I learned about all kinds of vitamins and minerals and herbs and supplements. And all of a sudden I get this bottle was sent to my little apartment where I was living. At the time I was broke. Dr. Calvin McCausland sent it to me. I'd met him in 1993. We lost touch with each other. And I'm so grateful he thought of me, sent me this bottle with a letter, an invitation to take a look. And I thought, I've seen every supplement. I've seen everything out there, but this was different. So Dr. Vollmer, how is transfer factor different than the typical vitamins, minerals, and supplements that we see out there in the world?
That's a great question. It's usually the first question that we get because most people have not heard of transfer factor. And it's because it's just not like any other ingredient that you're going to come across. As you mentioned, it's not a vitamin, which we're all familiar with. It's not a mineral, and it's not even an herb or a botanical. And the way I really think about transfer factor is it's a sophisticated colostral extract that contains highly bioactive peptides and proteins. We actually concentrate these peptides and proteins using this proprietary and patented technique called ultrafiltration. And that was what generated the first product that Dr. McCausland sent to you, was this ultrafiltered colostrum. Now, many companies out there also have colostrum-based products because there's a lot of wonderful benefits from colostrum, but none of those products really extract out these bioactive peptides, these transfer factors, like we do at For Life. And so we're really quite different than the other products that you might see out on the market. And in terms of the research, we've done a lot of research, and we'll probably get into that a little bit during this call, particularly around natural killer cells. And those have shown that transfer factor has these wonderful immune benefits, these properties that other competitors don't have. In fact, we've actually recently shown in one of our newer products that transfer factor acts as a prebiotic, and so it acts in the microbiome. And no one else has done that type of research with a product like this.
That's quite interesting. Wow. You know, I like to use analogies. I'm big on analogies, and I get that question often now because you do see colostrum in some of the health stores out there, and I just tell people, look, here's how I compare transfer factor to colostrum. It's like saying in the earth, under the ground, there's something we call oil, crude oil. If I took that crude oil, you know, like would be colostrum, let's say, and I took that oil and I put it in your gas tank of your car, what will it do to your car? It'll kill it. It won't run. Well, if I took the gas from your car and went down to the airport and put it into an airplane, would it fly? No, it won't. So if I took fuel from an airplane and went to NASA, you know, in Cape Canaveral, Florida, and I put that airplane fuel into the space shuttle, will it take off? No, because there's a process it goes through to get to that rocket fuel. So I look at transfer factor, that's the rocket fuel, you know, and it takes a lot of colostrum just to get a little bit of transfer factor, correct?
That's right. Yeah, there's very little transfer factor in colostrum, and so it requires these specialized filters that we call ultrafilters. And what that really does is it allows us to take all these things that are in colostrum and really standardize or extract out these highly bioactive peptides and proteins that make up transfer factor.
Interesting. You said the word peptide. This is a question I asked Dr. Brock as well. You know, peptides, not many people hear that word a lot. I'm fairly familiar with peptides as being a protein, amino acids. But can you tell us all, what is the definition of a peptide?
Yeah, so peptide, you can think about it as simply just a biomolecule that exists in every living system. It's made up of smaller molecules called amino acids. You may have heard of amino acids. Those are really oftentimes described as the building blocks of life. And so you have amino acids that make up peptides. And then if there are, and that usually goes up to about 50 amino acids. And so they're like these long chain of amino acids that make up these peptides. And as they get larger and larger, that becomes what we call proteins. And so you have amino acids that make up peptides, and then peptides that make up proteins. And these peptides, these proteins, these amino acids, they play a lot of different crucial roles within our body, including biological functions like acting like a hormone. So they're very, very important molecules. And they have been identified, transfer factor has been identified as a peptide type or a protein type of molecule.
Interesting. You know, our boy Brandon, he's 20 years old right now, but when he was 2 years old, I went into my office and I saw him on the floor. He had somehow opened a bottle of transfer factor. At the time it was classic, and he ate the whole bottle. But he had some capsule stuck on his face because of the slobber, you know. But, you know, I thought it was kind of cute. I wasn't worried. Some people ask me, well, can I take too much transfer factor? Is it dangerous? I wasn't worried because I saw a study by Jeunesse that was done, I think it was at the University of Irvine, I think. They did it in conjunction. But it was a toxicology or toxicity study. And they found no toxicity at these tremendous levels. But can you tell us a little bit about, you know, is there like too much transfer factor a person could take?
It's a great question. And just generally speaking, transfer factor, you could consider as a natural product. And so generally the perception of natural products is they are safe. However, that said, For Life has done a lot of work demonstrating the safety of transfer factor through a number of these safety and toxicological studies that you were mentioning. Now, these studies are really similar to what's being done when you develop a pharmaceutical drug. And so they're every bit as safe. They're natural. And we have the tox studies that show that. In fact, the last set of studies that we just completed and was published last year allowed us to achieve what we call GRAS status. And GRAS stands for generally recognized as safe. And what's interesting about these studies and what you had mentioned earlier was that we couldn't actually find a dose level, even the highest dose levels that we were at, we couldn't find a dose level that would give us what we call an observable adverse effect. So some sign of a safety, an issue with safety or an issue with toxicology, we couldn't find it at even the highest levels of transfer factor. And so we know through these studies, we know that it's natural. We know that they're safe as demonstrated by all these different studies. And that last set of work to allow us to become a GRAS ingredient was actually published as well. And I can send that to you, Dave, if you want to send you a link to that if anybody's interested in reading that. It's very cool, very detail oriented, but it really talks how we go through the process of demonstrating that we have a product that is safe. Now, in terms of what you were talking about with your kid, one thing to think about, transfer factor is absolutely very safe. The one thing to think about when you talk about transfer factor with kids is how it's delivered. And so when you think about small kids, things like capsules and tablets could be difficult. Children might choke on them. And so when you're talking about kids, you really want to think about transfer factor in terms of chewable formats like TF Chewable, a liquid format like Rio Vita, some of those types of things as well. And then you also have to think about ingredients, right? And so not all ingredients, transfer factor has been studied. We have a lot of data, a lot of studies showing the safety of transfer factor, but not all ingredients that we have in our transfer factor products have been studied on kids. And so when we haven't studied them in children, then we wouldn't recommend them for children. And so an example of that would be TF Plus. There's a number of ingredients in there that have not been studied in children. And so we wouldn't recommend those for children. And generally speaking, if you look at the label, you can tell based on how the label is written, whether it's suitable for a child or not. And so things like Classic and Trifactor would be, but there may be other products that are not suitable for kids.
Interesting. You mentioned Transfer Factor Plus. I remember, when I joined For Life, they were just a few months old, 1998, and we were all real excited to have this exclusive transfer factor product nobody had heard about. We're the first ones to take this to the market. And all of a sudden, they started talking about this Transfer Factor Plus. And it kind of confused us because we were like, well, we thought we had this great transfer factor. Now we got a plus. Next, is it going to be Transfer Factor Plus Plus? Then plus, plus, plus? Is this kind of like the Pentium processor? And so, but, I learned a lot listening to Dr. McCausland and some of the other doctors that, we're learning about combining transfer factor with other components that create this synergy. So tell us just briefly about the difference between Trifactor or Classic and Plus, and even what we're learning. I'm sure we're still learning new things.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's probably one of the biggest questions that we get is what's different about Classic versus Trifactor versus Plus. And we're actually going to be working on a campaign that's going to come out shortly that will help explain the differences. And so I can give you a little bit of sneak peek on that. So basically, if we look at it from an ingredient standpoint, so Transfer Factor Classic is simply the ultra-filtered colostrum that makes up transfer factor. So we talked about how transfer factor is this kind of this soup of all these wonderful ingredients, but transfer factor is a very small piece of those ingredients. And so we use this ultrafiltration process to actually extract out that transfer factor and concentrate it in a way that none of the other colostrum supplements out there can do. And so that's what really differentiates 4Life from many of the other companies out there. And so that's what we call classic. Then we've also found through our research over the years that there is transfer factor in eggs. And so we call that ovofactor. It's actually in the egg yolk. And so we've been able to patent and develop a technique, a method to pull transfer factor out of eggs as well. And so when we put the transfer factor out of colostrum, which is what we call ultrafactor, we also have another fraction that we call nanofactor, which is ultrafiltered, but instead of being ultrafiltered, it's nanofiltered. So it's even smaller transfer factor molecules. And then we combine that with ovofactor. Those three components make up what we call trifactor. And so there's wonderful benefits that trifactor has that classic doesn't. And so you might, someone might be interested in seeing what some of those benefits would be. And then as we move on, we actually have what's called transfer factor plus, which Dave was mentioning earlier. And that takes the trifactor that we have in trifactor and adds other immune ingredients from mushrooms, from aloe, from a number of different baker's yeast, a number of different ingredients that have immune benefits. And the whole idea in that product and in many of the products that you'll see at 4Life is that when we have a particular health target that we want to look at in terms of a product, we like to look at different ingredients that will attack that target using different methodologies, different mechanisms of action. And the reason why you do that is because when you put them together, you get these additive or synergistic effects like Dave was talking about that give these wonderful benefits overall as a whole product. And so Transfer Factor Plus is really designed that way, where you add all these benefits of things like mushrooms and so on, as well as the benefits of Trifactor, all coming together to impact your immune system in a positive way and in a synergistic way. And so, as I was mentioning, we are going to be having, probably in the next week or two, we're going to really dive into the research of how we can distinguish these from one another. We have the research that's been done many, many years ago, but we've done in the last few years, and maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit, we've done a number of research studies showing these wonderful benefits using new technologies that allow us to really look at these products in a really unique and cutting edge way.
Wow, that's very interesting. You know, so you talk about targeting, if you will, and I know that 4Life's cardio, transfer factor cardio, was the first targeted product that they introduced. And again, you know, as I was going through the years in the beginning, learning from, you know, from classic to plus and so on, when they introduced the cardio, it was mentioned that when there was the discovery of ovofactor, well, having the ability to control the environment of a chicken or a hen, it's easier than a cow. And that's enabled 4Life to actually do more research when it comes to the targeted products. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Yeah. And the interesting thing that we've learned over the years, and it's not just us, it's other researchers, is that when you look at the benefit of having a strong immune system, all of these other body systems like the cardiovascular system, your cognitive system, all these different systems, there is an immune component within each of these systems. And so when you have a strong, an educated, an optimal immune system, all of these other body systems that we talk about in these targeted products also benefit from having that strong immune system. And that's really the whole basis for the targeted line, is to take that immune component of whatever that health target is or that body system is, and allow that immune component to be optimal so that it can take care of the immune part. And then we have other ingredients within these targeted products that will take care of the body system part. But again, it all starts with having a really strong and sound immune system. And I think we know from the things that are going on right now that having a strong immune system is really central and key to having good health.
Especially right now with what's happening. You know, people on an average day, not many people talk about their immune systems. But I'd
Yeah.
say, I think it's safe to say that right now, a lot of people are researching and studying and talking about their immune system and how they can protect themselves against threats. So
Yeah.
we're very blessed to have, transfer factor. We're talking targeted products here. There's one word that I've heard throughout the years, and I've heard, different definitions, and that's polyvalent. We
Mhm.
talk about transfer factor. I've heard it said that it's polyvalent. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but would a comparison kind of be like broad spectrum?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, polyvalent, just the word itself means many benefits. And so when you think again about the immune system being the core system in our body and how it affects everything we do, things like digestion, our lungs, brain, etc. If you have a good immune system, then you're going to achieve that overall well-being that we all want. And that's kind of the summary of what polyvalent really means.
Interesting. You know, um, as I started studying transfer factor, I learned about Dr. Sherwood Lawrence's first discovery in 1949, and how he was doing research, being an immunologist at the University of New York, a professor. And by the way, if any of you were curious, you can always put him in Google, H. Sherwood Lawrence. His name's Henry Sherwood Lawrence, and there's a Wikipedia all about him. The first sentence, it says, best known for his discovery of transfer factors in 1949. So as I learned about transfer factors, I just became so fascinated by this. And I thought to myself, why is it the world doesn't know about this? Now, I have my own philosophy, and it goes like this. After World War II, antibiotics were the big thing, and everybody talked about this wonder drug, antibiotics. And so transfer factors got put on the back shelf, basically. And then it resurfaced later. And now, here we are. We hold all these patents on this technology. Doctors have learned that antibiotics, there's been an abuse of them, first of all. I mean, and I always say they're great for preventing death, but they're not made to maintain good health. But anyhow, that's
Right.
another story. But Dr. Vollmer, why is it that you feel that transfer factor isn't something that was talked about so much over the years, and all of a sudden it's becoming a big deal?
Yeah, that's a great question. The research of transfer factors has always gone on, even in the age of antibiotics. There's always been these researchers who've had interest in this area. It did die off, as you mentioned, with antibiotics, and probably one of the other areas that hurt the transfer factor research was in the 80s when AIDS and other bloodborne diseases like Hep C and those types of things, they really shifted the focus of transfer factor research, because up to that point, all of the transfer factor had been done in blood. And so when they started seeing all these diseases coming up in blood, then a lot of that research really took a back seat. And what it actually did is open up opportunity to look for transfer factor in other matrices or other biological fluids. And it turns out that, and this is the discovery that David, he didn't make the discovery, but he found the literature. This was the literature, the research that was done, the patents that were done finding transfer factor in colostrum. And so when David Lisenby found that research, found those patents, that's when he realized this is the company that he wanted to start. He wanted to found this company on that technology to be able to pull transfer factor, pull these wonderful immune benefiting ingredients out of colostrum.
Interesting. When I tell my story, or the story of transfer factor, and by the way, that's what the business is about for us, those of us out in the field as distributors. We need to be good messengers, good storytellers. And I practiced with my grandma. I practiced with my dad. I practiced with Gabie. I even practiced in the mirror sometimes, telling the story about transfer factor. I'd start with Dr. Lawrence briefly, but then I would talk about the mother. When she gives birth to her newborn baby, she has an opportunity to pass her acquired immunity, a lifetime of information that she's acquired, from all the threats she's had to defend herself against. Well, the baby is born with no acquired immunity. The baby has an innate immune system, but not an acquired immune system. So the mother now has an opportunity to pass that acquired immunity to her newborn baby. To me, it just kind of makes sense. But that's the way it is, right, Dr. Vollmer?
It is. In fact, we know, so the transfer factor that we get at 4Life is from cows, right? Bovine colostrum. And what we know about bovine colostrum is that if the calf, the newborn calf, doesn't get colostrum, it won't survive. Because its immune system is naive, right? It's not been exposed to any of these health threats the mother has, and so it needs that colostrum to be able to acquire that immunity, that passive immunity benefit. And so, yeah, it's incredibly critical to newborns, to calves, to many different species. What I want to stress here, though, is that when 4Life acquires the colostrum to make transfer factor, we don't take all of the colostrum. The calf actually gets about 75% of the colostrum, and we take the remaining about 25%. And so we're not hurting the calves or anything by taking all that colostrum. They get plenty of colostrum. They do very, very well. But it really does point to the fact that colostrum and transfer factor in particular are so important to our immune system, because if that calf doesn't get the colostrum that contains the transfer factor, those calves won't survive. And oftentimes it's within a day or two.
I'm glad that you said that, because you basically just changed my story. I had it reversed. I was always telling people that the calf gets 25%, that's all it can consume, and we take the other 75. I guess it's the other way around.
Yeah, no, and it actually varies. We were at the dairies about a month or two ago, and so I was asking them those types of questions, and each dairy is a little bit different. So some dairies might take 50%, some might take 25% to make up our colostrum. It really just kind of depends on the colostrum production as well as what the calf needs are.
And we only harvest that in the first 24 hours, don't we?
Sorry?
The first 24 hours, that's when the colostrum has the abundance, or greatest abundance of transfer factors.
Yeah. So what happens is as soon as the calf's born, that first or second milk is full of transfer factor and full of these rich immune benefiting ingredients. But then as it starts to transition over the course of days, that colostrum now turns closer to milk. And so the transfer factors, all these other wonderful benefits, immunoglobulins, all of those levels go down. They're still there, but they're in very, very small, minute fractions of what colostrum has. And so really getting it within that first probably 12 hours, that first couple milkings, where the concentration of transfer factor is at its highest and its most bioactive portion of the colostrum, that's when we collect the colostrum. But of course the calves all get enough colostrum to allow them to thrive.
Do you have the ability to determine the potency of the transfer factor that you have in the colostrum?
Yeah, we do. That's something that was probably one of the first things that I started working on when I got to 4Life, because at that point we had very crude methods on following what we call these biomarkers of transfer factor. And so we've developed a number of different methods that allow us to monitor the consistency of transfer factor from every lot that we make, from every dairy that we get it from, not just in terms of being able to make sure we have adequate amounts of transfer factor, but also to look at the activity and make sure that the activity from lot to lot is consistent, so that we know if you get a bottle of transfer factor classic or trifactor or whatever, that if you get that today, you get it 2 years ago, you get it 2 years from now, it's going to be the same transfer factor in each circumstance. And so the quality, the consistency. Sorry?
The shelf life.
Yeah, and we do shelf life testing as well. And so we have a number of testing methods, a number of assays that we use to ensure that the quality is the highest and that there's consistency from every lot that we receive. And so we look at these at an ingredient level. And so we look at every lot of transfer factor that comes in, even before we add it into any products. And so it's really getting tested many, many different times along the way, from the dairy, from our ultrafiltration process as a raw material, and then on as a finished good product. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of different tests that are going on in all of the ingredients, not just transfer factor, in all of the ingredients as we develop these products and as we manufacture these products.
Yeah, that's the one thing I love about For Life is they take this science seriously. I've never seen a company, especially in our industry of network marketing, that invests so much in science and validation and substantiation. In fact, you were involved, I believe, when you come on board in that the study that did on ProTF at
At Auburn.
Auburn. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. In fact, that was one of the things that attracted me to For Life was the level of research, the amount of science that goes into the products. Of course, I came there as a quality person, and so the amount of quality or the emphasis on quality that For Life has on their products was really impressive to me. And I had been kind of watching the dietary supplement industry as I was in pharmaceuticals. And as you probably know, there's a lot of players out there that don't really do it that way. They cut corners. Quality is not that important. And that's really something that I think sets For Life apart from a lot of different companies in terms of the quality and the research that goes into the products. In fact, a story that I always like to tell when people come around and I give a tour of the labs is that when I first got to For Life, we were in the process of building the quality lab. And so we bought all this equipment, well over $1 million worth of different testing types of equipment, looking at minerals and vitamins and identification, botanicals, all these different types of tests. And as we started to develop these procedures, these methods, train these scientists to work in these labs, I was going out, not being familiar with this industry, going out and talking to other people within the industry, my peers out there at different companies. And I realized pretty quickly that the emphasis on quality and science and research really wasn't there at some of these other companies. And what I found really interesting is that over time, as I was at For Life, the folks that sell us all this equipment, these $1 million pieces of equipment, they would start bringing their clients to our lab. And I would ask them, I was like, why are you bringing, essentially our competitors into our lab? And it turns out that they wanted to show them how it should be done within this industry, how the methods that we develop should be validated, how the equipment that we have should be qualified, how the people that run it should be trained, which all goes back to my days in pharmaceuticals, which is that was how it was done, when I was in pharmaceuticals. And so those processes are slowly trickling into the dietary supplement industry, but that's really something in my mind that really sets For Life apart from other companies, is the level and the emphasis on quality and the emphasis on research, the emphasis on substantiation is unlike most companies out there.
Well, I can say that the transfer factor certainly changed my life. The quality of this product. I grew up, by the way, in the 60s. I'm 60 as of today, actually. Thanks. And so growing up, I grew up at a time where a lot of mothers didn't breastfeed their babies. I was one of those kids that I didn't receive that first maternal milk. My mom bottle fed me. And I really believe that, my struggles that I went through growing up, every time I got sick, I was given an antibiotic. I think that also is detrimental to my health long-term. And so I just noticed that when I started taking transfer factor, my health changed. I just found that my overall well-being took a turn, and I just started feeling much better. And I found myself, honestly, getting sick a whole lot less. And I've been to 106 countries, and my immune system is like a Sherman tank. I just have a very strong immune system now, and I attribute that to transfer factor. So yeah. I feel great.
What's interesting is that as I was learning about transfer factor, when I got to For Life, I started reading a lot of the research on colostrum, breastfeeding, and it's interesting because one of the papers that I came across looked at babies who had been breastfed versus babies who had been infant fed. And it turns out that if you look at a big population of these babies, that there's a subtle difference in terms of the incidence of upper respiratory tract infections. And so babies who have been breastfed have a lower incidence of having upper respiratory tract infections than babies who have been infant fed. Now, that doesn't mean that any individual baby is going to have upper respiratory tract infections, but when you look at a large population and you look at the subtle differences that you might find between babies that are breastfed and babies that are infant fed, there are these small little things that they are finding out that could have potentially significant consequences. And then it turns out that if you start looking at some of the infant formulas now, you will see that they are really becoming much closer to breast milk than they ever have been. And so they're adding things like these oligosaccharides that have been present in breast milk that no one really knew about until they had technology to allow us to discover them. And so as they discover them, they start to add these into the infant formula to make it more like breast milk. And so that's really, the breast milk is really the gold standard of infant formula. And so they're getting closer and closer and closer. But the research behind those differences are really fascinating. That was something that I thought was incredibly insightful for me, speaking to the benefits of the immune system as it pertains to having colostrum as well as transfer factor.
You know, they don't have transfer factor though in those products. That's the difference. And
That's right.
our son, Brandon, our boy Brandon, he's 20 years old now, but he was one of those babies that he didn't want to have anything to do with the breast milk. And so after he was born, because he wouldn't breastfeed, I made the decision. I told Gabie, I said, you know what? I'm taking Transfer Factor Classic. I opened the capsule up and I just put the powder on his lips and he would lick it. And throughout his childhood, we were giving him Transfer Factor, even when he was a newborn baby. And the funny thing is, he's 20 years old today. All these wonderful products we have between the chewable, orange flavor, Rio Vita, great drink. Guess what product he takes? He takes either the Classic or the Trifecta, puts the capsules, he'll put sometimes 3 or 4 capsules in his mouth, and he chews them because, you know, he just got used to that taste of the Transfer Factor. Classic and Trifecta. Don't do that with Plus, you guys. You know, but
Right.
that's the way he grew up on Transfer Factor. So, you know, we're very blessed that he didn't have to go through what I went through as a child, you know, through some of the health challenges. But it's quite interesting. Now, these studies you talk about, this is a question that was asked to Dr. Paula Brock. If we want to get access to some of these studies, I know that PubMed, for example, is a place with a lot of studies, probably thousands, but you have to subscribe to that and probably even be a doctor. Is there a way to access some of these where if people want information on this, even the abstracts?
Yeah, well, PubMed, you don't require a subscription. It's a free service. It's a free search engine, basically. And what it will do is if you look up Transfer Factor, you look up colostrum, what you're going to get is thousands and thousands of research articles that have been done. We have collected many of those articles and utilized them to help develop the research that we have done. But we've actually also done a lot of our own research. And I don't know that we have a central repository for all of that research, but if you want to ever reach out to me or reach out to product support and ask for that, we have a list of all the research that we've done. It's actually, it was interesting because I was looking at it the other day and I think we've published, I don't know, it must have been 5 or 6 articles just in the last 2 or 3 years, which is kind of unheard of in our industry. Most people don't publish in our industry. Right. In fact, the last product we developed, collagen, we actually published an article on how we developed collagen, what ingredients went in there, what was our thinking with collagen. And it was interesting because we were working with a consultant at the time, and as we were walking him through the process of how we develop these products, how we find these ingredients that have different potential synergistic or additive effects because they have different mechanisms. He was just blown away. He's like, you guys should really publish this stuff. And so we decided to do that. It's a little bit unusual. Most companies don't publish their trade secrets, but this was compelling enough that when we published this, in the publishing process of this is really kind of an interesting industry, it's almost like I liken it to like a beauty pageant, right? And so you do all this research, you write all this paper, and then you submit it to these judges, right? These reviewers, so that they can look at it and decide whether they think it's worthwhile or not. And so when we submitted this manuscript for the development of the ingredients that went into collagen, it got published right away. It was accepted with very little revisions. And so we actually published it prior to even launching it. Now, we, of course, didn't let anybody know that we'd published the research article because nobody knew that we were going to be launching TF Collagen. But once we launched that product, then we followed it up very quickly with a press release talking about the publication of that. And then beyond that, we actually have a publication that's probably going to come out in the next, I would say, probably 6 months, depending on how the review goes, on a clinical trial that we did on collagen, where we showed all these wonderful benefits of folks who are taking the transfer factor collagen. Benefits like skin moisture, fine lines and wrinkles improvements in elasticity, improvements in firmness, all these wonderful benefits that people realized as they were taking the product. And that's going to be published, I would say, probably by the end of the year, I would guess.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely would love to get my hands on some of that information. That's great. I love that. You know, you mentioned earlier about transfer factor in blood. You know, Dr. Lawrence, Sherwood Lawrence, that was the first discovery. Now, I live in San Diego, here in California. I'm close to the border. And I remember years ago, as I was talking to people about transfer factor, some doctors came to one of my meetings and they talked about transfer factor in blood. And one of the doctors actually did injections, transfer factor injections. And so, you know, he brought up this theory, I guess, that it goes straight into the bloodstream. But I've talked to other doctors that said that they prefer the oral method for many reasons. One, it's much more, I guess, responsible. You're not dealing with blood. Number two, it's actually much, much less expensive. And three, they're finding they get the same results. And in some cases, they've even found better results taking it orally than injecting it. But one of the arguments was transfer factor passing through the digestive system and possibly the degradation of the peptide. So if you can share with us briefly a little bit about how it's absorbed through the digestive tract into the bloodstream.
Yeah, and I have to preface this by saying that, you know, we don't know a lot about exactly how that happens, and so there's a lot of theories out there. We currently subscribe to the theory that it is absorbed through these things called Peyer's patches, and so it allows the transfer factor, these peptides and proteins, that once we ingest them and they go into our body, they traverse the stomach. And oftentimes these peptides and proteins can be degraded a little bit, like you mentioned, but these peptides, these transfer factor proteins, they actually get absorbed into the bloodstream through what we believe are these Peyer's patches. And then that allows the transfer factor to get wherever it needs to once it's gotten into the bloodstream. But all of that is kind of a theory at this point. Until we specifically identify transfer factor down to the molecular level, then we won't be able to figure that out. But we do have a lot of research that's going on that will help us be able to determine that. And of course, the other thing to think about too, when we think about our immune system, most of our immune system is actually in our gut. In fact, 70% of our immune cells are in our gut. And so transfer factor is able to interact, to communicate with these immune cells in the gut. And so oftentimes you may not even need to get into the bloodstream because most of our immune cells are actually already here in the gut.
Important point. I never thought of it that way, but very true. You hear, in fact, I don't know how long ago it was, but I started hearing a lot about the immune system begins in the gut.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about that. Gabie.
And it makes sense too, right, Dave? Because if you think about the health threats that you might encounter, how are those health threats going to come into your body? They're oftentimes going to come in through your mouth. That's right. Things that you eat, right? And so it makes sense that most of your immune cells, most of your immune system is centered in the gut because that's where a lot of your health threats are going to come from.
Interesting. I just unmuted Gabie. She has a question on collagen study and telomeres. Is it a question, sweetie, you have, or was it just you wanted me to remind me to ask Dr. Vollmer later?
Now, actually, at convention, they mentioned something about collagen and telomeres. And telomeres are very important to keep us youthful, vibrant,
right.
vitality. Yep. Telomeres are important. They're good to see if our stem cells are good too for any kind of repairs we may need. Anyway, well, have you guys finished the study? So that was my question.
Yeah. So that's actually going to go in the paper, in the publication that I was talking about. This is going to come out later this year, and it's a good comment on that. What we found in this telomere study, and so just if we want to back up for a second, we think about telomeres. Telomeres are really kind of the end caps of our DNA, and so we have our chromosomes, which are in our cells, and then within our chromosomes are these long pieces of DNA, and at the end of those are our telomeres. And our telomeres are at the end because they want to protect the DNA so it doesn't degrade over time as these cells proliferate, as they split and grow into new cells. And so it turns out that we were doing a study because we thought there were some anti-aging benefits, right? Because telomeres are kind of anti-aging markers. And so we wanted to look at our transfer factor collagen product in the context of what happens when we treat these telomeres with the transfer factor collagen product. And it turns out that these telomeres actually are protected by this enzyme called telomerase. And so telomeres, again, are at the end of the DNA. So they're kind of the shoestring, the cap on the shoestring. And telomerase is an enzyme that's allowed to protect, is there to protect those end caps, those telomeres. And it turns out that when you look at telomerase, this enzyme that helps protect telomeres, that when you give it transfer factor collagen, it actually activates that up to 277% higher than if you don't treat that with transfer factor collagen. And so what it really is telling us is it's got some anti-aging benefits along with these other wonderful benefits that you see in the skin that we've actually seen in these clinical studies. And so all of that research is actually going to be published, again, in this article that I believe it's actually close to being submitted at this point. And so it really kind of depends on how long the reviewers take for this manuscript as far as when it will be published. But my guess is it's probably going to be published for sure by the end of the year. And it will go into all the details of the study that we did to support telomerase activity with the transfer factor collagen.
And we'll have access to that?
Oh yeah. So one of the things, when I got into the R&D and we started talking about publishing, one of the things that we decided was that any research that we publish, it has to be what we call open access. And so you're mentioning of being able to having to have a subscription. So PubMed actually allows you to search search these different journals, but the different journals may or may not have access. You may need a subscription in particular journals. So for instance, the New England Journal of Medicine, Nature, all these very prestigious journals, you need a subscription to actually look at the articles. When we started developing and publishing our research, we made a conscious decision to only publish in journals that were considered open access. And so what that means is that if you go on to Google and you search for a research article that 4Life has done or has published, it will be an open access article that you'll be able to go in and read everything about the research that was done in that publication.
Fascinating.
That's not cheap. It's expensive to make, because nobody's making any money if people can look at it for free. And so it ends up that whoever's writing the article has to foot those costs. And so that's a conscious effort that 4Life has made so that it allows access for distributors, customers, or whoever wants to see our research.
What about trade secrets? I mean, isn't that stuff disclosed in some of these articles?
Yeah, no, we are very careful about how we describe the products that we study in there. And so they're described in somewhat generic terms. There's no formulas in there.
Okay.
And so even if you look at the review article that we did on how we develop collagen, you won't find the formula in there. What you will find is all the ingredients that we looked at, and some of them we decided not to use, but it's important for us to look at everything, and we wanted to report on that. But most of the ingredients are already in there in that article, but the amounts, the formula, and all that sort of stuff is still kept secret. So it's still a trade secret.
Okay, great. Now, for those of you that have just joined us, by the way, we're with Dr. David Vollmer. He's the Chief Scientific Officer for 4Life Research, and we're very fortunate to have pinned him down. He's holed up in his home too right now as we're all doing our social distancing. He's taking the time to join us today to also ask questions, which we will open it up right now in the Q&A section. We have a few questions, but I have one more question.
Okay.
Now, as I've gone through my 4Life career, I always get excited about what's on the horizon. And you shocked me yesterday when we talked on the phone. You told me that they're already looking not at the upcoming convention in a year, but the one in 2.5 years. So you guys are always looking ahead in research. So I just want to know, how do you feel about the future of transfer factor and the things that you guys are learning and discovering about this amazing technology?
Well, I would say that the future is very bright for transfer factor. We are really at the beginning. It's interesting because as you talked about my predecessors, Dr. Cal and all those, I remember listening to Dr. Cal talk about transfer factor, and he made the comment that we probably only know about 10% of everything about transfer factor. And it's interesting because we've done a lot of research, we've published a lot, we've learned a lot, and I still feel like there's so much more yet to be discovered about transfer factor. And so we're really still at the very beginning. And what's wonderful about being at the beginning is we have these tools that we didn't have 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We didn't have at the time of all the transfer factor research during the Sherwood-Lawrence era. But we have all these wonderful tools that we'll actually be talking about in the next few weeks, talking about how transfer factor has benefits not just towards natural killer cells, but also other cells, other immune cells. And so that's going to be coming out pretty soon, and we're going to be talking a lot about that through our marketing channel. One of the interesting things that's happened just lately, and you guys are actually going to be the first to know about it, is we've started a partnership with an immunology researcher. This happened about midway, latter part of last year, of immunology research at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And if you've heard about that department, that's part of the National Institutes of Health. They are very prominent in a lot of the press conferences that are going on over the last few weeks. And this person who we're working with, who we're partnering with, he was a postdoctoral student of a professor named Charles Kirkpatrick. And Charles Kirkpatrick was really kind of the forebearers of transfer factor. He was one of the last pioneers in transfer factor research before it started to kind of die off. And what's interesting about this researcher that we're working with is he believes he's identified transfer factor in blood. And so we're actually working with him to hopefully be able to identify it down to the molecular level in colostrum. So you can imagine it's very, in this very complex mixture of colostrum, what are these small little molecules that are not very present? And that's why we need to extract them out, is because they're in very, very low quantities. They're not very present, but if you can identify it, if you can figure out what that is, then that allows you to go look specifically in different things like eggs and colostrum and milk, all these other areas where a transfer factor might be there, but it's just, we don't know what to look for, right? It's kind of an unknown. And so a lot of his work is working towards identifying that. We're working together with him using these state-of-the-art technologies, these proteomic type of technologies that allows us to identify these peptides and these proteins. And what we know from his work as well is that these things that he's studying, he's finding immune benefits and immune memory in all of his research. And what was very interesting to me, Dave, is the first time I talked to him, he's a very serious person. And he actually said, yeah, I've looked at your stuff. I didn't believe it. I didn't think it was going to work. And then I tested it and it worked just like the transfer factors that he's getting out of blood. And so that really made me feel good, because here you have somebody who I didn't even know he was working on our products, and he comes from a very prestigious institution, and yet he's been looking at our products and he's been seeing some of the same results that we're seeing. And so that really gives you a lot of confidence, the confidence we talked about when you have other people looking at your stuff and testing your stuff and finding the same or maybe even better benefits.
Incredible. You know, I just want to tell everybody that's listening out there how fortunate, how blessed we are to be involved with this amazing company, with this amazing product. I know this is not a business call right now or a business webinar, but you know, if there's ever a time to get involved and to get the word out there and work, you know, tell people, build your business. It's right now. I saw this, you know, 21 plus years ago, the opportunity, and I didn't want to miss it. And back then, no one was talking about this. Well, look at what's going on around the world. People are talking about their immune system so much. Now, you know, this just applied to me. I've been working with Vollmer for 22 years, but my business, last month alone, it grew 15 million. I normally do over 20 million. It went over 35 million in the month of March because of what's going on out there. So, and this is the beginning, you know, like Dr. Vollmer said, we're really at the beginning of this and we're learning more. So the future is incredibly bright, you guys. And I feel like signing myself up all over again. So let's go ahead and open it up for some questions that we have here. We'll start with Lisa Mahone. Lisa's asking about the collagen. This is a good question, Lisa, because we do have kosher products. Is it possible, can the collagen also at some point in time be made kosher?
Yeah, we're working on that, and I believe we're very, very close. In fact, I think we probably are kosher. We may not advertise that because within the U.S. market, it's not that important. But if you go over to different markets within the world, particularly I'm thinking of particularly Southeast Asia, where collagen is huge, it is presented there as halal and kosher. And so it's probably not been advertised or marketed that way here in the U.S., but I believe it is.
Okay, wonderful.
If you have a way for me to follow up, I'm 99% sure that that's the case, but I just need to go do a little bit of digging to be 100% sure. And so I can always follow up with that. But I think as far as I know, it is considered kosher and halal. We sell it in Southeast Asia. It does really, really well in that market. And so those are always the requirements in Southeast Asia. And so I would assume that same categorization is for the U.S. product as well.
You know, regarding the collagen, what's the chance of eventually having an unflavored collagen so that we can actually add our own flavor to it?
It's a great question. And as I mentioned to you yesterday, we're working on products all the time.
Okay.
And maybe I should leave it at that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, let's go to Colwinder up in Canada. She's asking, does it matter when you take the products, if it's in the morning or evening time? You know, I guess biologically, is there any difference?
No, probably not. If there are differences, the differences are probably pretty subtle. And so my recommendation for these types of questions is take it when you remember it. What time of day for you to remember it the best is when you should take it. Because what happens a lot of times is that you might try to find the perfect time to take it, right? But then one day that's the perfect time, but the next day it's not. And so to me, the key here is consistency, right? Making sure you take it every day and take it at a time that's convenient for you. And that's really the key, right? Is consistently taking it, not when is the optimal time to take it, because that may not be optimal every day. And so to me, the key is just finding a time where you can devote to, always taking it. And so for me, that's always in the morning. I take all of my, except for the Pro TF, I take all of my supplements in the morning with my breakfast, because that's convenient for me. It's easy for me to remember. It's sitting out on the cabinet. And so I know I'm getting it every day.
And with food, without food, it doesn't make a difference, right?
It depends. Yeah. I mean, there's subtle differences depending on what type of ingredient. If it's a fat soluble vitamin, like vitamin E, then you would want to take that with food. But other water soluble vitamins, it may not make any difference. But again, over time, having a consistent time when to take a product is more important than should I take it fed or fasted.
Okay. And transfer factor is a water soluble, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Okay, great. We have a question from Anna Mendez from Boston, Massachusetts, asking if transfer factor classic or trifactor has any soy ingredients at all.
They do not. Nope, there are no soy ingredients in classic or in trifactor.
Okay.
Remember, it's classic is just the bovine ultrafiltrate or a transfer factor out of bovine colostrum that's been ultrafiltered. Trifactor is ultra-filtered colostrum, nano-filtered colostrum, and then ovofactor, which is the transfer factor out of eggs. And so none of those have soy.
Okay, great. And talking about, chickens and bovine, the question we have here from Greensboro is how transfer factors from bovine or chicken eggs are adaptable in human immune systems. Simple answer, she said.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that could be a really complicated answer. And that research was actually done during the Sherwood-Lawrence era. And so what they did is they looked at transfer factors across species. And it turns out that transfer factors across species are able to have the same benefits. And so they looked at different animals. In this case, you're talking about going from bovine or from chicken to humans. It turns out that all that research demonstrates that transfer factor as these small bioactive peptides offer the same benefits that they would, say, a calf, that they would also offer to a human. And so the answer is yes, they are cross-species compatible.
And David Lisenby, that's one of the things that he had discovered in his research, if I'm correct.
Yeah, that was
being non-specific, non-species specific.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It wouldn't make sense if it was species specific. Then we probably wouldn't be here today. Right.
Or I better not say what I was going to say. They run around finding women that are had just had newborn babies saying, "Hey,"
That's right. Yeah.
Anyhow, okay. So next question from Gilmar down in Brazil. I'd like to take a shot at this one, if you don't mind, Dr. Vollmer. This one's basically about vaccines. And the way I've always said, look, a vaccine to me really is, first of all, it's specific towards a disease, all right? Whether viral, bacterial, whatever. It's like a picture, a snapshot, so that your immune system now can identify whether it's tuberculosis or whatever it is. And it comes, the root word vaccine is from vaca, cow, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's like a snapshot, a picture, so that your immune system can recognize, respond to that particular disease, if you will. And so that's what a vaccine is. Whereas transfer factor, as I mentioned earlier, like being polyvalent, but transfer factor is basically having a whole bunch of snapshots, if you will, so that your immune system can recognize, respond, and remember threats. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yep. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, thanks. Gilmar, I hope that answered your question, but thank you for the question there. Here's one from an anonymous attendee. Hi, Dr. Vollmer. Are there any stem cells activating ingredients, precursors, and for-life products?
That's a great question. That's an area of research that we haven't really dove into. There's a lot of products out there that talk about that. But that's really something that we haven't spent a lot of time on. My guess is we would probably see transfer factor have some activity as it pertains to these stem cells. And I only say that because every time we look at transfer factor, no matter what research, what system we're looking at, whether it's a prebiotic, whether they're looking at natural killer cells or T cells or B cells, it always has these incredible benefits that you may not expect. And so without having done much research on stem cells, I would venture to say that we would probably see some good activity there as well.
Okay, great. Have one here, I think it's from Coolwinder, just asking about combining the various products, you know, whether it's cardio with TF, with glucoach. I mean, can you overdo it? Can you have too much or combine too much of the transfer factor products?
There are probably some products that you wouldn't want to take together, but by and large, and I think generally we put instructions within the label, but by and large, most products you can take together. In fact, a lot of times they are designed to be taken together. And so imagine the situation. So what I always do is I always start with Right Start. Right, Right Start is my foundational supplement to take, and then there may be times where I want to take a glucoach or a cardio that I supplement on top of Right Start. And so a lot of our products are designed to be taken together, and so there shouldn't be any problem if someone wants to mix or match or add products together. Oftentimes, you'll get even better benefits as you add different products, depending on what sort of health concern you might have.
Right. I always tell people, go ahead, sweetie.
No, I was just wondering, can you take enzymes with transfer factor, digestive enzymes, because it is a protein? So
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. So I guess you'd have some concern of whether the digestive enzymes might chew up the transfer factor. Turns out that we actually have a system that has transfer factor and digestive enzymes. It's called the Digest for Life Reset System, and it actually has transfer factor in there. Not necessarily because of the protein. It's actually transfer factor as a prebiotic, and so we have these digestive enzymes that help break up all of the sugars, the fats, the carbs. But we also have transfer factor that acts as a prebiotic. And so from a digestive standpoint, there's no problem at all. In fact, you might see some wonderful benefits taking those together.
Interesting. Okay. You mentioned earlier that Right Start is your base. One thing I tell people all the time, I say, look, at least take your transfer factor plus or trifactor, but begin with your transfer factor and then add to that. You know, like if you want to put glucoach or cardio or recall. But I always tell people, look, take transfer factor plus, you know, unless you feel you want to take trifactor, but begin with that and then add to that. But you know, I like for sure, Right Start's my favorite product, you know, because you got everything. You look at that box, I'm blown away when I look at everything that is in that product. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think if you talk with most of us in the research and development department, you'll get the same answer. They always start with Right Start as well, just because there's so many wonderful ingredients within that product. It's pretty convenient to take, and so that's the first thing I take in the morning with breakfast, and then I supplement that with other products depending on what my particular health concern is at that time. I also like to take Pro-TF over the course as well, because it has a wonderful lot of protein benefits as well. But yeah, that's Right Start is my base product, and then I build off of that.
Yeah, and I think economically too, it's makes sense. It's a great product because many people go to, you know, the health store, GNC, Vitamin Shop, whatever, and they buy enzymes, they buy either antioxidants, maybe grapeseed extract, they buy their essential fatty acids, they buy their vitamins, their minerals. You end up having, you know, 20 different bottles in your cupboard. Here you got a box with some sachets. You can throw a sachet in your purse or your pocket, and you've got what you need for the day.
Yep, absolutely.
So convenient and cost effective. So let's go ahead and we'll take one more question here. Actually, it's a simple question. It has more to do with marketing, really. Marcel from Australia is asking, will you be expanding the product range down under in the near future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. We haven't penetrated that market as well as we should, as well as
I was just going to say, get the sales up, and I'm sure they will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's always the key, right? Is once you have those sales, then the products will follow. The Australian market's a little bit different than other markets, and so they do have a little bit of a more stringent requirement in terms of registering products within Australia. It's called the TGA, if you're interested. But we don't have any regulatory issues with our products as it pertains to TGA. Excuse me. Most of the issue is just building that market, finding the right leader down there to build that market. And then once you have a good leader down there, then the products will come.
That's it. You know, we began this with Transfer Factor Classic, you guys. We didn't have everything we have today. And I tell people, you guys are very fortunate because you have so much more resources today, so many more tools available, you know, a whole scientific team now. We began with this with just a couple of products, and that's what we had to build upon. So you guys can achieve much more today than we could in the early days. So we've got, actually, Dr. Vollmer, this one has to deal with what we talked about yesterday. So why don't we take this one as the last question, and then we'll close the call. And again, you know, we thank everybody for joining us, and especially Dr. Vollmer taking the time to be with us today. This video, our webinar, will be uploaded to my website, davedaughtry.com. You'll be able to download it either later this evening or in the morning. It has to process by Zoom, and then we'll make it available in the education library on my website. So this one, it just simply says, and I'm sure this is on everybody's mind. It says, oh, wait, I lost it. I apologize here. It has to do with the old coronavirus, I guess. It just says, what do you advise us on ways to explain to people about the benefits of transfer factors to protect themselves from this pandemic that is traveling around the world?
That's a great question. It's a question that we get a lot, not just with the coronavirus, but we get disease questions all the time. And so it's always good for me to answer these questions. I like to get these questions because it gives me an opportunity to explain why we can't talk about this. Because a lot of times people get really upset that we can't talk about disease. And so this offers me an opportunity to kind of explain why we can't do that. So from a regulatory standpoint, not just in the US, but across the world, dietary supplements are used to help supplement, right? That's why they're called supplements. They're used to help supplement the diet. And they're used to help supplement the diet in the context of a healthy subject. And when you start talking about diseases, you're now not talking about a healthy subject. What you're talking about is you're talking about drugs, right? And so to treat diseases, you need drugs. And drugs go through a very different regulatory path than dietary ingredients do. Dietary ingredients are inherently much more safe than drugs, and so they don't have to go through all the safety and toxicity, all the efficacy studies that drugs do, because they are inherently much more safe. But they are only designed in the context of a healthy subject. And so when we talk about dietary supplements and diseases, we can't treat, we can't cure, we can't prevent, we can't say any of those things as it pertains. And the reason why is because we haven't studied it that way, right? We haven't studied it in the context of the disease. We haven't studied what happens with transfer factor to someone who has coronavirus, because that's a drug. Now we would be making drug claims. And if you want to make drug claims, you have to go through all these steps. You have to go through this regulatory path that pharmaceuticals have to go through, that dietary ingredients don't have to. Now we could do that. We could try that. And some companies have tried that. The problem is that when you have ingredients that are natural, it's really, really hard to patent natural ingredients. Now we've been able to patent them through method patents and use patents, but inherently it's very, very difficult to patent natural ingredients. And so if you can't patent it, and then you do this wonderful study to show that transfer factor works on this disease, and you've done all the clinical studies to demonstrate that, you've spent, now it's over $1 billion to develop a drug that gets approved by the FDA, you would never be able to recoup all that, because the minute you develop that drug, everybody's going to come in and create something very, very similar, because you can't protect that with a patent. And so two very different regulatory frameworks for disease, and then for what I consider as kind of a proactive approach to your health. And so because we don't study these products, these ingredients in the context of the disease, we can't make any disease claims. And so that's why you see 4Life being very, very cautious, very, very conservative about this, because frankly, it's just against the law. And I know that there's, I read this every day, Dave. I get the warning letter from FDA, and I see every day that somebody's talking about, their product treats COVID-19, and the FDA comes in and they shut them down. And we don't ever want that to happen to 4Life. We want this to be a sustainable business, a long-term proposition for everybody, so that this first-time caller on this Zoom call can have 22 years at 4Life, just like Dave has had up to this point. It's really trying to protect the company, to protect the distributors, so that we don't go out there and we make unapproved claims, illegal claims that could put the company in jeopardy.
Wow. I am going to listen to that answer over and over, and I'm going to memorize it. Seriously. Yeah, that's how I've become a good messenger, by the way. I listen to these things and I process them and I memorize a lot of them. But that is an amazing answer, because I get asked that question a lot too. They even ask about the FDA and all this. And so that's awesome. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, if you want to avoid this pandemic that's going around, just do what I did. I built a house on the moon, and you can see through my window right now. So I'm fine.
So Gabie's not with you then, huh? She's back at the house and you're on the moon.
I just teleport. I'll be back downstairs in a few minutes.
He doesn't, and it's like he's gone anyway. I feel like a single mom sometimes.
Por favor. Okay.
He's working really hard though, so that's why it's okay.
Well, hey, you guys, let me finish with this and then we'll close the call. If there's ever a time to get the word out, it's now. I am spending a lot of time talking to a lot of people, and that's why my business grew 15 million last month, because I'm taking advantage of an opportunity, trying to maintain balance as well. Yes, today's my birthday. Thank you, everybody, for all the wonderful birthday wishes. I really appreciate it. I'll be spending the rest of the evening at 7:30 here now with my family. And so, but I love this business because it gives me the ability to choose. I am not a slave to having to get up every day, go to work, and thank heavens I'm not, because look at those people that are slaves to that. They can't do that right now. They're stuck home. And here I'm very fortunate that my business is growing while other people's businesses are suffering, because I have a home-based business. To me, this is normal, and when everyone said that they're stuck at home, I'm like, well, I always walk 20 feet from my bedroom to my office every day. That's how I work. I've been doing this for 40 years, network marketing, with 4Life almost 22 years. So we're very blessed to have Dr. Vollmer with us today. He's answered some great questions, given us some great wisdom and insight. And we're so fortunate to have people like Dr. Vollmer with us with 4Life, and we hope you're always here with us, Doctor. Don't go anywhere else, okay? So
absolutely, I love 4Life. It's a wonderful company, wonderful distributors, wonderful customers, wonderful management, wonderful founders, wonderful employees. And give a shout out to the people, as Dave was mentioning. There has been a tremendous amount of sales going on, and so we have people working night and day on weekends to keep up with all the demand on products. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to all the folks in our global supply chain that kind of keep the light on, keep the machines going, keep the products coming, so that everybody can benefit, particularly at this time.
Thank you. Thanks, Doctor. And a shout out as well. This is not a recognition type of meeting, but I do want to recognize all of you that have achieved new ranks, whether it's diamond, presidential diamond, international diamond. We had a number of gold international diamonds that broke rank last month. And so you're all working hard. We appreciate it. And, I'll just say this and we'll close out, that my observation of 22 years with 4Life is that the people that come into 4Life stay with 4Life. Everybody from Steve too, who I met back in 2000, when David Lisenby acquired the company called ShapeRite. Steve then became our president and CEO. But many people at 4Life have been with the company since its inception. Why does that happen? Because they know a great company when they have one, and they stay around. And that's frankly why I have distributors, Gabie and I, just like many of you, that have been with me for the past 20 plus years. And it's because we know what we have. So we're very grateful. Let's protect it as well by the things we say and how we share this opportunity out there. Just be cautious, but get out and share the word. And if you really want to know, I just go and use the Connect app. Anything that 4Life produces, you've got videos, you've got presentations, PDFs, those are all approved by the company. It's great information. Use that, spread the word. If you're home and you're watching a movie, take out your cell phone, get on there. You can send 10 videos through WhatsApp to 10 contacts in your telephone. Send 100 out a night. Every one of you got hundreds of people on your cell phone. Get the word out. So Dr. Vollmer, thanks again for being with us. Look forward to what's coming out in the future. You kind of gave us a little hint. So we're grateful for that. And thank you everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe, all right? And let's get out there. Let's keep going. Let's keep growing, all right? And remember, teamwork makes the dream work. We'll talk to y'all real soon. Dr. Vollmer, thank you.
Thank you for your family, Dr. Vollmer. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.